Welcome back to the Capitol Report. I'm Steve Lance. Today, the Supreme Court hearing oral arguments on President Trump's authority to issue emergency tariffs. What might come out of the case? Joining us now to discuss is Jim Trusty, former federal prosecutor. Jim, great to have you back with us. So the justices had really tough questions for both sides. How are you reading this case based on the line of questioning? Are there any indications when the justices are sort of giving both sides a hard time?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's tough because these guys are professional interlocutors, and there's times where there's devil's advocacy, and they can be pretty good at masking where they're coming from. But I think this is going to be a problematic case for the administration. I think thought that before, and really hearing what some of Justice Coney Barrett and Justice Roberts had to say today was pretty worrisome in terms of the use of this particular law for tariffs. You know, this is a law that's based on the idea that in emergencies, Congress will delegate the power to control trade to the president. And it's very unclear, and that's what this argument was all about, very unclear as to whether the emergency power to regulate commerce means you can levy taxes or tariffs across the board against a whole bunch of different countries. So I think they have real issues with what the intent of this statute, this International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, whether it's supposed to allow you to do tariffs in the first place, and then is it really an emergency if you're imposing tariffs on almost every country in the world? You know, it's one thing for Canada, Mexico, China to say this is an emergency based on fentanyl, but when you get down to, you know, Trinidad, Tobago, and Australia, and you're saying, I just want to make trade fair, that sounds like something that creates this separation of powers issue that the court seems to be leaning against.
That's just it, Jim. You know, when it appears to be perhaps somewhat subjective, yet you have very pressing issues on the table. Like you said, the fentanyl crisis. Trump says that he used the tariffs to leverage India and Pakistan to stop, you know, potentially both nuclear powers from a major clash. And then, of course, China, that infiltrates the United States in various asymmetric ways that we can't do over there. And so another way we can push back on them is tariffs. Are there any other avenues to protect our sovereignty in these particular cases?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't pretend to have a perfect answer for it. I mean, look, there are other areas of delegation that you might be able to use instead of the IEPA, the Emergency Economics Power Act. And frankly, you know, I think the safest bet here, if you could pull it off politically, would be to have Congress backing it up every step of the way. You know, Congress, if that's where the primary authority to levy tariffs is, you know, have them kind of cleaning up behind the elephants a little bit, you know, as the parade marches on of, I think, pretty undeniable success in using tariffs without harming the American economy. If Congress would somehow validate it on the back end, maybe that would be a way to keep this in place. But you're right to point to the problem, which is, you know, this has been used apparently quite successfully in a number of different avenues. And the disruption by saying he no longer can use this statute, does not have this power, has to give money back to importers. It could be a very disruptive moment where I guess only if you're a complete free trade person that doesn't believe in tariffs are you going to be happy with that outcome.
And I mean, I don't know about the Supreme Court's daily briefings. Do they get an intel briefing that perhaps could open their eyes to some of this? I don't know. But you raise, you know, another important question with regard to the economy, another subjective item. Trump's, you know, legal team warning that a ruling against him could have catastrophic consequences for the nation's economic health. In simple terms, can you help explain this, and would it be viable for that reason?
Well, I mean, I think the starting point is the court is going to view this as, you know, kind of a self-created problem. If they rule against the administration, they're going to say, yes, this is disruptive as heck, and it's going to create problems where the Treasury has to calculate refunds to a number of importers who have essentially paid the tax. But it's a strange scenario. I mean, you've had, you know, months of these probably billions and billions, at least in the dozens, if not hundreds of billions, that have been imposed by way of these tariffs. And suddenly you're being told Treasury has to let go of all that. I know the Supreme Court cares about practical consequences, but I think from the questioning, again, from Roberts and from Coney Barrett, asking questions like, to John Sauer, the representative for the administration, you're saying that this president under IEPA can basically levy taxes for every country in the world for unlimited times and unlimited amounts. I mean, that type of question tells me they realize that the separation of powers issue is so powerful to them that they're not going to care too much, or they're not going to be overwhelmed by the practical consequences. So, we'll see, but didn't look like a great day for the administration.
We know the CCP has been out in full-fledged on K Street in Korea and really lobbying against these tariffs. Now, if the court rules against Trump, would the government need to refund the $195 billion, as it's being reported, that it's collected so far since September in tariff revenue?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big devil in the details. It does suggest that that's a possible outcome, and how that gets calculated, how that gets distributed, when that gets distributed, seems like there's going to be a cottage industry of litigation that grows up, that blows up after that.
And Jim, how would such a ruling affect our national security? And do you think it might prompt some of these foreign governments that we've made close deals with or solidified deals with to perhaps renegotiate some of these recent trade agreements?
Yeah, it does give them that leverage, and that's a worrisome moment. And again, maybe the force of personality wins out and President Trump can keep all those deals in place, but it's going to be a real temptation, excuse me, and a real opportunity for some of our less friendly countries to say, well, you've been undercut by your own court. Let's start from scratch.
Now, Jim, I want to turn our attention to the Big Apple, New York City's new mayor-elect, Democratic Socialist Zoran Mamdani. President Trump posted on Truth Social after Mamdani's win, saying, and so it begins. Just, 4 short words with an exclamation point. Can the president withhold federal funding or deploy the National Guard there? And could he increase ICE operations within the city? How do you see this all playing out?
Probably with a lot of litigation and a lot of lawyers, unfortunately. I mean, look at Chicago. That might be a bit of a preview. And so, look, the National Guard part is certainly inflammatory. It leads to litigation. I think it actually leads to a reduction in crime just based on deterrence, because they're not there to make arrests. They're there to support other federal agents. Whether he plays that card or not, I'm not sure. But, a surge in federal investigations and federal resources being poured into any particular locality is completely fair game. And most fair-minded politicians would realize, hey, if they want to give us more ICE, more DEA, more FBI to take on street crime in our city, we'll take it. So that one, I think, not only is it constitutionally protected, there's no such thing as sanctuary cities in the eyes of the Constitution. But I think practically that's a move that would be hard for any mayor to really thwart. He can complain, he can moan, he can sue, he can find some friendly judges, maybe like they did in Chicago at first. But eventually that's going to bubble up to an appellate court that says, you do not have the power as a local governor or mayor to thwart federal law enforcement taking place in your jurisdiction. So I think the president has some options that are safe in terms of trying to fight crime. In terms of funding, the shutdown might be a part of this, where you can kind of use the shutdown as a vehicle for also thwarting particularized local spending. But at the end of the day, the president's power over the purse is very limited. And when he wants to fight, when he wants to have rescission of funding that's already been delegated by Congress, you're limited to essentially the same fiscal year. So if you really want to get the money rescinded, you have to go through Congress and get them to say, we take everything back from last year. That's a tough sell. But if you have the ability of stuff that's in stream to delay it, you're allowed to do that for several months at a time. So maybe the president does that on some of the, macroeconomic ideas in terms of grants and spending that's in New York City. But I'm not sure. I think he might have been commenting more broadly that New York has actually succumbed to the foolishness of putting a socialist in power. And it was more of a ruining the day for New York than any sort of announcement of a plan.
Time will certainly tell. We'll have a clearer idea come January when the new mayor officially takes office. Jim Trusty, as always, appreciate your insights.